here I am, sliding into class. So we are going to finish up Chapter 4 of Bridge to Terabithia right now. So in my copy, we're on page 57, but we are also reading on the PDF here, which is on page 23, and we are starting right here where we left off. So just a real quick review. What's going to happen? Leslie and Jess go to the woods and create an imaginary world of Terabithia. Imaginary world. So they just pretend like kids do. So let us get going here. After they had watched Maybelle tearing up the hill, clutching her new treasure, Jess and Leslie turned and ran up over the empty field behind the old Perkins place and down the dry creek bed that separated farmland from the woods. There was an old crabapple tree there, just at the bank of the creek bed, from which someone, long forgotten, had hung a rope. They took turns swinging across the gully on the rope. It was a glorious autumn day, and if you looked up as you swung, it gave you the feeling of floating. Jess leaned back and drank in the rich, clear color of the sky. He was drifting, like a fat, white, lazy cloud, back and forth across the blue. "Do you know what we need?" Leslie called to him. Intoxicated as he was with the heavens, he couldn't imagine needing anything on earth. "We need a place," she said, "just for us. It would be so secret that we would never tell anyone in the whole world about it." Jess came swinging back and dragging his feet to a stop. She lowered her voice almost to a whisper. "It might be a whole secret country," she continued, "and you and I would be the rulers of it." Her words stirred inside of him. He'd like to be the ruler of something, even something that wasn't real. "Okay," he said. "Where could we have it?" "Over there in the woods, where nobody would come and mess it up." There were parts of the woods that Jess did not like. Dark places, where it was almost like going underwater. But he didn't say so. "I know," she was getting excited. "It could be a magic country, like Narnia. And the only way you can get in is by swinging across on this enchanted rope." Her eyes were bright. She grabbed the rope. "Come on, let's find a place to build our castle stronghold." They had gone only a few yards into the woods beyond the creek bed when Leslie stopped. "How about right here?" she asked. "Sure," Jess quickly agreed, relieved that there was no need to plunge deeper into the woods. He would take her there, of course. But he wasn't sure. He wasn't such a... He would take her there, of course, for he wasn't such a coward that he would mind a little exploring now and then farther in amongst the ever-darkening columns of the tall pines. But a regular thing, a permanent place, this was where he would choose to be. Here, where the dogwood and the redwood played hide and seek between the oaks and evergreens, and the sun flung itself in golden streams through the trees to splash warmly at their feet. "Sure," he repeated himself, nodding vigorously. The underbrush was dry and would be easy to clear away. The ground was almost level. This would be a good place to build. Leslie named their secret land Terabithia, and she loaned Jess all of her books about Narnia, so he would know how things went in magic kingdoms, how the animals and the trees must be protected, and how a ruler must behave. That was the hard part. When Leslie spoke, the words rolling out so regally, he knew she was a proper queen. He could hardly manage English, much less poetic language of a king. But he could make stuff. They dragged boards and other materials down from the scrap heap by Miss Bessie's pasture and built their castle stronghold in the place they had found in the woods. Leslie filled a 3-pound coffee can with crackers and dried fruit, and a 1-pound can with strings and nails. They found 5 old Pepsi bottles, which they had washed and filled with water, in case, as Leslie said, of siege. Like God in the Bible, they looked at what they had found, what they had made, and found it very good. You should draw a picture of Terabithia for us to hang in the castle, Leslie said. I can't. How could he explain it in a way that Leslie would understand? How he yearned to reach out and capture the quivering life about him, and when he tried, it slipped past his fingers, leaving a dry fossil upon the page. I just can't get the poetry of the trees, he said. She nodded. Don't worry, she said. You will someday. He believed her, because there in the shadowy light of the stronghold, everything seemed possible. Between the two of them, they owned the world and no enemy. Gary Fulcher, Wanda K. Moore, Janice Avery, Jess's own fears and insufficiencies, nor any of the foes whom Leslie imagined attacking Terabithia could ever really defeat them. A few days after they finished the castle, Janice Avery fell down in the school bus and yelled that Jess had tripped her as she went past. She made such a fuss that Mrs. Prentice, the driver, ordered Jess off the bus, and he had to walk the 3 miles home. When Jess finally got to Terabithia, Leslie was huddled next to one of the cracks below the roof trying to get enough light to read. There was a picture on the cover which showed a killer whale attacking a dolphin. What you doing? He came in and sat beside her on the ground. Reading. I had to do something. That girl! Her anger came rocketing to the surface. It don't matter. I don't mind walking all that much. What was a little hike compared to what Janice Avery might have chosen to do? It's the principle of the thing, Jess. That's what you've got to understand. You have to stop people like that. Otherwise, they turn into tyrants, dictators. He reached over and took the whale book from her hands, pretending to study the bloody picture on the jacket. Getting any good ideas? What? I thought you was getting ideas on how to stop Janice Avery. No, stupid. We're trying to save the whales. They might become extinct. He gave her back the book. You save the whales and shoot the people, huh? She grinned finally. Something like that, I guess. Say, did you ever hear the story about Moby Dick? Who's that? Well, there was once this huge white whale named Moby Dick. And Leslie began to spin out a wonderful story about a whale and a crazy sea captain who was bent on killing him. His fingers itched to try to draw it on paper. Maybe if he had some proper paints, he could draw it. There ought to be a way of making the whale shimmering white against the dark water. At first, they avoided each other during school hours. But by October, they grew careless about their friendship. Gary Fulcher, like Brenda, took great pleasure in teasing Jess about his girlfriend. It hardly bothered Jess. He knew that a girlfriend was somebody who chased you on the playground and tried to grab and kiss you. He could no more imagine Leslie chasing a boy than he could imagine Mrs. Double-Chinned Myers shinnying up the flagpole. Gary Fulcher could go to you-know-where and warm his toes. There was really no free time at school except recess. And now that there were no races, Jess and Leslie usually looked for a quiet place on the field and sat and talked. Except for the magic half hour on Fridays, recess was all that Jess looked forward to at school. Leslie could always come up with something funny that made the long days bearable. Often the joke was on Mrs. Myers. Leslie was one of those people who sat quietly at her desk, never whispering or daydreaming or chewing gum, doing beautiful schoolwork. And yet her brain was so full of mischief that if the teacher could have once seen through that mask of perfection, she would have thrown her out in horror. Jess could hardly keep a straight face in class, just trying to imagine what might be going on behind that angelic look of Leslie's. One whole morning, as Leslie had related it at recess, she spent imagining Mrs. Myers on one of those fat farms down in Arizona. In her fantasy, Mrs. Myers was one of the foodaholics, who would hide bits of candy bars in odd places, up the hot water faucet, only to be found out and publicly humiliated before all the other fat ladies. That afternoon, Jess kept having visions of Mrs. Myers, dressed only in a pink corset, being weighed in. "You've been cheating again, Gussie!" the tall, skinny directress was saying. Mrs. Myers was on the verge of tears. "Jesse Aarons!" The teacher's sharp voice punctured his daydream. He couldn't look Mrs. Myers straight in her pudgy face. He'd crack up. He set his sight on her uneven hemline. "Yes'm?" He was going to have to get coaching from Leslie. Mrs. Myers always caught him when his mind was on vacation. But she never seemed to suspect Leslie of not paying attention. He sneaked a glance up that way. Leslie was totally absorbed in her geography book, or so it would appear to anyone who didn't know. Terabithia was cold in November. They didn't dare build a fire in the castle, though. Sometimes they would build one outside and huddle around it. For a while, Leslie had been able to keep 2 sleeping bags in the stronghold. But around the 1st of December, her father noticed their absence, and she had to take them back. Actually, Jess made her take them back. It was not that he was afraid of the Burkes exactly. Leslie's parents were young, with straight white teeth and lots of hair, both of them. Leslie called them Judy and Bill, which bothered Jess more than he wanted it to. It was none of his business what Leslie called her parents, but he just couldn't get used to it. Both of the Burkes were writers. Mrs. Burke wrote novels and, according to Leslie, was more famous than Mr. Burke, who wrote about politics. It was really something to see the shelf that had their books on it. Mrs. Burke was Judith Hancock on the cover, which threw you at first, but then if you looked on the back, there was a picture looking very young and serious. Mr. Burke was going back and forth to Washington to finish a book he was working on with someone else, but he had promised Leslie that after Christmas he would stay home and fix up the house and plant his garden and listen to music and read books out loud and write only in his spare time. They didn't look like Jess's idea of rich, but even he could tell that the jeans they wore had not come off the counter at Newberry's. There was no TV at the Burkes, but there were mountains of records and a stereo that looked like something off of Star Trek. And although their car was small and dusty, it was Italian, looked expensive too. They were always nice to Jess when he went over, but then they would suddenly begin talking about French politics or string quartets, which he thought was a square box made out of string, or how to save the timber wolves or redwoods or singing whales, and he was scared to open his mouth and show once and for all how dumb he was. He wasn't comfortable having Leslie at his house either. Joyce Ann would stare, her index finger pulling down her mouth and making her drool. Brenda and Ellie always managed some remark about his girlfriend. His mother acted stiff and funny, just the way she did when she had to go up to school about something. Later, she would refer to Leslie's tacky clothes. Leslie always wore pants, even to school. Her hair was shorter than a boy's. Her parents were hardly more than hippies. Maybelle either tried to push in with him and Leslie or sulked at being left out. His father had seen Leslie only a few times and had nodded to show that he had noticed her. But his mother said that she was sure he was fretting that his only son did nothing but play with girls, and they were both worried about what would become of it. Jess didn't concern himself with what would become of it. For the first time in his life, he got up every morning with something to look forward to. Leslie was more than his friend. She was his other, more exciting self. His way to Terabithia and all the worlds beyond. Terabithia was their secret, which was a good thing. For how could Jess have ever explained it to an outsider? Just walking down the hill toward the woods made something warm and liquid steal through his body. The closer he came to the dry creek bed and the crab apple tree rope, the more he could feel the beating of his heart. He grabbed the end of the rope and swung out toward the other bank with a kind of wild exhilaration and landed gently on his feet, taller and stronger and wiser in that mysterious land. Leslie's favorite place beside the castle's stronghold was the pine forest. There the trees grew so thick at the top that the sunshine was veiled. No low bush or grass could grow in that dim light, so the ground was carpeted with golden needles. I used to think this place was haunted, Jess had confessed to Leslie the first afternoon he had revved up his courage to bring her there. Oh, but it is, she said. But you don't have to be scared. It's not haunted with evil things. How do you know? You can feel it. Listen. At first, he heard only the stillness. It was the stillness that had always frightened him before. But this time, it was like the moment after Miss Edmonds finished a song, just after the chords hummed down to silence. Leslie was right. They stood there, not moving, not wanting the swish of dry needles beneath their feet to break the spell. Far away from their former world came the cry of geese heading southward. Leslie took a deep breath. This is no ordinary place, she whispered. Even the rulers of Terabithia come into it only at times of greatest sorrow or of greatest joy. We must strive to keep it sacred. It would not do to disturb the spirits. He nodded, and without speaking, they went back to the creek bank, where they shared together a solemn meal of crackers and dried fruit. All right, so let's talk about what happened in this chapter. See if I can kind of help you out. So, big part is that they go to the woods and they imagine Terabithia. Okay, and so here's the important thing: a dry creek bed means there's no water in it. Okay, and on one of the trees is a rope swing, and so they have a rope swing here, and they swing across. And as they swing across, they drop down over here, and that's how you get into Terabithia. See, you can't just walk across. It doesn't work that way. Because it's magic and imagination. You have to swing across. And you land over here in a whole new world. Just like Narnia. Okay, here's a goalie that they talk about, swinging across the goalie. That's just another example of a goalie. All right, I guess I got a little ahead of myself with Narnia. But we'll come back to Narnia. So it says intoxicated, which we might know from the word like being drunk. And it says, Leslie called to him, and he was intoxicated with the heavens. But he was so happy, it's like he lost control. Like nothing else mattered at all. He's just swinging on the rope and looking at the sun and the sky and the clouds. So in this case, it's to be so happy that he lost control. All right, here's Narnia. I hope you have seen the movie Narnia, and I hope you will read the books someday of Narnia. They are fantastic. I've got them over there in my classroom if you want to borrow them someday. But here's the point. This is an illusion, where Leslie says, look, it's just like Narnia. And in Narnia, these four brothers and sisters get into the secret magical world by going through a closet. It's called the wardrobe. And when they go through it, they come out to this magical land. So what she's saying is, we're connecting this world to the same idea as this world. So that's what an illusion is. If you know Narnia, you get the idea. That's why you should read lots of books, because you get more and more illusions. Okay, it's a connection to another story. So Leslie wants to do something like these kids, go into a magical world. All right. It says that the dogwood and redbud played. Now, a dogwood is a tree, and the red bud is a tree. So how do the trees play? Well, you have to imagine the wind blowing their branches. And it looks like trees might be playing, right? So it's that movement, that action. So that's what's going on there. The trees didn't actually play, but we use this word kind of metaphorically. Okay, now when they're in the land of Terabithia, they speak regally, like a king or a queen might do, right? So here's this idea of a regal queen. It's kind of funny, right? Fancy. All right. She says tyrants and dictators. So some of these pictures of men, we got Hitler down here and Stalin and a variety of other tyrants and dictators. So what she's saying is you can't let people boss you around. When Janice Avery pushes or pretends like you caused trouble and you let her get away with it, she becomes a tyrant and a dictator. You can't let her do that to you. Here is, in my book, is a picture of them in the fort they built in Terabithia. Kind of cool. All right. Here's yet another allusion to the story Moby Dick, which I would recommend, although it looks like a zombie Moby Dick. I probably should have looked at the picture closer. Well, anyway, Moby Dick is a story that you can read, and so it's another illusion. And it's just one of these ways that Leslie just reads and she imagines, and it is a white whale. Although it's not a zombie whale, so that's sorry. Recess. Hopefully you know what recess is. It's play break between classes. Unfortunately, here in high school, we don't get recesses. Okay. They're talking about Mrs. Myers and saying she is a foodaholic. And this aholic is when we talk about someone who's addicted to something. Like we might say an alcoholic, right? Or you might be a chocoholic, someone who's addicted to chocolate. Once I start eating, I can't stop. I'm a foodaholic. And so Mrs. Myers is kind of on the heavy side, and so they're teasing about her. And Jess starts imagining in class, and he imagines the teacher in his, this is what a pink corset is, right? You've been cheating again, Gussie. And here's the point. He's sitting here just imagining. And then when her sharp voice calls him back from his daydream, what? So we have to pay attention. This part doesn't happen. It's not real. It's only in his imagination. Okay? The teacher's sharp voice punctured his daydream, broke his mind being on vacation. So critical readers, we have to be aware of that shift, that change of what's going on, how he's imagining it, and then how it changes for him. All right. Leslie calls her parents Judy and Bill instead of mom and dad. And so that is a little weird for Jess. He's like, you call your parents by their first name? It's kind of weird. Most of us just call our parents mom and dad. All right. One of the other things here that we get is, okay, what kind of job do Leslie's parents have? You are correct. They are both writers. Mrs. Burke wrote novels and Mr. Burke wrote about politics. So that's what they do. They write books. So yeah, they're writers. Okay, there's no TV, but there is a stereo that looks like it's from Star Trek. And if you know anything about Star Trek, which you should because it's fantastic, and I love Star Trek. Yeah, you're not surprised. I'm kind of a nerd. I get it. That's okay. It's super like futuristic. It's like, oh my goodness, all these buttons and lights, and it's really amazing. So they might not have a TV, but they got a fancy, expensive stereo. Okay, and then we get back to Terabithia here, and they go into the woods a little bit more into the trees. And Jess is kind of scared. He's like, I used to think this place was haunted, like ghosts. But she says, no, it's not haunted with evil things. It's like Casper, the friendly ghost. It's good spirits. It's good, happy things that we can't quite see. Okay, and this place becomes sacred to them, like we might think of the inside of a church, or a place of worship. And I don't know where that is, but that place is amazing. That's an incredible picture. But anyway, um, so yeah, it becomes very, very special to them. We have to be quiet and respectful when we're here because it's such a special place. Okay, so what happened? Jess and Leslie create Terabithia, a kingdom from their imagination. They become really good friends. Leslie helps Jess not to be so scared of things. And Janice Avery continues to pick on them. All right, thanks for paying attention. Talk to you guys later. Bye now.